Now that we have the ability to list departments and create employees, it might be time to think about user authentication and restricting some of this functionality to users who have an account and are in a specific role. For example, I might want to restrict functionality in the create employee part of the application to just users who are administrators. Fortunately, there's two things that make this easier. First, the internet template that we selected to build this application includes a register page, includes a login page. That allows a user to enter their username and password and get logged into the site. The other thing that makes this a little bit easier is the authorize attribute in ASP.NET MVC. With authorize, I can apply it to a specific controller action, or I can apply it at the controller level itself. And what authorize will do without any other parameters is say the user has to be logged in. User has to be registered and logged into the site in order to be able to get into this action. And I can even restrict this to specific users or specific roles, a comma-separated list of roles and users. And let's just say that we want to restrict this to people who are administrators. I can apply this at a specific controller action, or I can apply this at the controller level, which will make more sense for the employee controller because I want to protect everything inside of here. And what the MVC runtime will do is intercept every request that is arriving for any action in this controller, make sure the user is in this role, and if they are not, it will not allow them to proceed. It will redirect them to the login page and force them to log in before they can get here. And now the question is, how do I create this role, and how do I put users into that role? Well, ultimately, what I'm going to need to do is add some additional views and functionality to this application, perhaps to the account controller that already does some user management. Add some additional functionality that will allow me to manage registered users, put them into roles, remove them from roles. I know that if you look around in NuGet, you'll see a few packages you can download that will give you this functionality. Troy Good wrote one that I know of, but I'm going to do something very simple that will just bootstrap us and allow us to get started. What I'm going to do is go over to the Entity Framework Code First configuration for migrations, this file that we added earlier when we enabled migrations in this project. And I'm just going to seed the database with an admin role and a user that is in that role. Remember, this seed method runs every time that we execute update database. And so if there's ever data that I need to get in the database that is just boilerplate data, I can add it here in the seed method. But what code do I write? Do I write code using the Entity Framework, or do I write code using ASP.NET? Because it turns out ASP.NET already includes an API for managing users and roles. It's a provider-based model, provider components, so you can have users and roles stored in SQL Server or anywhere you want if you plug in the right provider. All you need to do is implement their API. The default membership and roles providers work with SQL Server, and they are configured in the web.config file that we're using for this project. And they are configured to use the same default connection string that we are using to talk to the eManager database with the Entity Framework. So this is a bit of an interesting situation in the sense that we'll have two cooks in the database kitchen. One is the Entity Framework, which will manage the schema and data for employees and departments. The other one's going to be the ASP.NET membership and roles providers, which will manage the users and roles, not only the users and role data, but also the users and role schema. Here's where you can see the default membership provider configured, the specific provider that is being plugged into the runtime, and also over in this piece of configuration, you'll see what connection string to use, the default connection. There's also a default role provider. I just need to make sure that it is enabled, so make sure that enabled equals true for the role provider in order for it to work. And now what I can do inside of my seed method is use the ASP.NET membership and roles API to seed the database. So I could say if roles, and roles, by the way, is in the system.web.security namespace. If roles.role exists admin, so if this doesn't exist, negate this. If it doesn't exist, we'll create it. Roles.create role admin. And now I can do the same thing with a user that I want in this database by default. If membership dot And let's try to get the user first to see if he exists, to see if I exist. You can search for users several different ways. I'll go by username. So if there's a user S. Allen, well, if that returns null, then I know S. Allen doesn't exist. So I need to create him. So membership, create user. The simplest possible way to do this is just pass in a username and password. So S. Allen, and I'll use the password fluffybunny@1. And of course, this is just a bootstrapping password. As soon as I get logged into the system, I'll want to change it so that my real password just isn't hanging around in plain text in the source code. And then the other thing I need to do is add S. Allen to the admin role. So before I do that, before I seed the database, let me build this and just show you that we have an authorize roles equals admin attribute on the controller, on the employee's controller. So if I come in and try to create an employee, what should happen is the MVC runtime will detect that I am not authorized to do this. It redirects me to the login page. I'm not able to log in yet until I actually add that user to the database. So let's do that. That is as easy as doing an update database. But before I do that, I'll just show you that currently our emanager.web database only has departments and employees. I'll do an update database that will run the seed method. The ASP.NET membership and roles provider, when I interact with that API, it'll look in that same database, see that the schema doesn't exist to hold users, and hopefully create it for me. So if I come back out and refresh this, I now have applications and memberships and users. If I look at the list of available users, there's S. Allen. S. Allen's password will be stored in the memberships table. That password here will be encrypted with a salt. And I can also make sure that we have an admin role. So this all looks good. It looks like update database and our seed method executed just like I wanted it to. So let's try this again. Create an employee, and now I should be able to log in as S. Allen, fluffybunny@1. Let's try that again. fluffybunny@1, and I'm logged in. I'm logged in as S. Allen. I can create an employee now. I can also go in and change my password. The current password is fluffybunny1. I'll change that to something else to be a little more secure.